Now we're streaming.
Oh.
All right, so almost like I've not done this before.
So in a nutshell, basically, all of the APIs on System Text Encoder today work either with arrays, pointers, or spans. David and the Kestrel team had a scenario where they wanted these APIs to also be able to work with ReadOnlySequence and iBufferWriter for dealing with really large payloads, things that can't fit into a single span. The scenario for this is like I'm reading data off the network. I'm the web server, for instance. It's coming in as bytes. I want to push it out to a buffer writer that will generate a sequence of chars, for instance. These APIs can't live directly on system text encoding because of layering issues. ReadOnlySequence and iBufferWriter aren't in an assembly that's reachable from system private core lib. But they could live as extension methods in the same assembly that iBufferWriter and ReadOnlySequence live in.
Just to clarify, this isn't just for really large payloads, right? This is just because ReadOnlySequence is sort of the lingua franca of pipelines, and so
correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I shouldn't have said the scenario is only for large payloads. It's really for chunked payloads where the whole thing can't be, for whatever reason, where the whole thing is not representable as a single span, maybe because it came in as 2 packets on the network.
Right.
The fact that these are extension methods means that it is obviously possible to write this code today. It's just a little tricky. And we're hopefully in the business of making usable APIs.
We don't have the encoding extension slide today, right? This would be a brand new thing, right?
Yes, the namespace would be system text. Because we always use the same namespace as this parameter. And the assembly would be system buffers, I guess. System memory, wherever ReadOnlySequence and iBufferWriter live.
So the implementation will be like straightforward, or what?
It should be pretty straightforward, yeah. We can optimize the implementation, like we can take shortcuts to say, oh, is the ReadOnlySequence a single span as opposed to a sequence of spans? Like, if so, we can just go down a fast path. But otherwise, this implementation would handle all of the merging of data itself.
I know there's been some discussion about ReadOnlySequence and its size in the past. Is it still of a size that we believe in is correct?
I don't know the answer to that. However, I know that a bunch of our APIs that take ReadOnlySequence do take it as span. For whatever reason, source.net isn't covering that right now.
Yeah, source.net is currently broken for anything outside of core lib.
Okay.
So I have a quick question. Why would these be extension methods?
As opposed to an instance method?
Yeah.
Because system text encoding is in system private core lib, and ReadOnlySequence and iBufferWriter are not. So the extension method would have to live outside of system private core lib.
Or we figure out what the point in time is when we decide that ReadOnlySequence is considered core enough to be in core lib.
Yeah,
right, that's also an alternative.
I mean, I don't know. Like, this seems to me like kind of that turning point, right? It seems a bit weird to like introduce these higher level things just to allow that indirection, when more lower level things kind of would benefit from it. Like, it seems, I don't know. I don't know whether we have other cases where we would like to take a buffer writer, but I would guesstimate based on the way the type is being used, that's probably not being the only case where we would like to do that.
Could we decide at some point in the future that we can convert the extension methods into instance methods?
We can't ever turn it into an instance method, but we can move this entire type down into system private core lib if we want to.
You just have now yet another type, right? So like the you can never remove the encoding extensions type.
I do see we have extension methods hanging off of ReadOnlySequence today. I'm sorry, we have extension methods that take ReadOnlySequence as a this parameter, and those extension methods appear to be marked as in this, as opposed to just regular this. So it looks like the pattern is still to take it as in.
Yeah, I'm just asking because I know some changes were made late in the last release, I think, to read-only sequence to reduce its size, and I don't know to what size it was reduced, and whether we believe that's below the threshold. Since in general we prefer not to pass things.
Yeah, it looks like right now the size is 2 references and 2 integers.
And
so
changing.
That's going to be at least 24 bytes on.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be copied by.
Copied by value.
Copied by reference internally, regardless of how.
Oh yeah.
So, in just avoids an additional copy that happens at the API layer.
Yeah, the thing's going, like Tanner said, the thing's going to get stack spilled anyway.
So we have another assembly which is system text encoding code pages. Do you think this can live there?
You said system text encoding?
Yeah, code pages.
Code pages?
Yes.
It doesn't seem like the right assembly for this, though.
But it includes all encodings that we support today, almost, except the Unicode ones.
I don't know, it seems odd for anyone to take a dependency on that particular assembly just for this extension method that doesn't really have to do with code pages. Right?
Right, but this assembly is inbox anyway now, and it will not cost anything if you depend on it. But I'm just telling about we have this option. I mean, like I'm not pushing for it.
Are read-only sequence and iBuffer writer available down level? Like, do we have a net standard package for it or something, or is it exams only? Read-only sequence and iBuffer writer. I guess we would have to, because
I think we added read-only sequence to net standard 2.1. I'm not sure we actually exposed it.
Well, system text JSON has a dependency on these, right?
It might be in memory, actually.
Okay.
Yep, it's in system.memory. So it ships as a system.memory NuGet probably.
So regardless of extension method versus instance method where it lives, like, are there any problems with the overall API signatures?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
I mean, they are patterned after the existing instance methods on the encoding class.
So the current ones get bytes, are all instance methods, right?
Yeah.
So then they all take effectively encoding as the first argument.
Yes. There are some differences. For example, the getBytes method that writes to an iBuffer writer instead of writing to a span returns a long instead of an int, because you could write more than 2 billion elements. But beyond that, the pattern is intended to be identical.
So do you want to get byte counts and get char counts or something like this? Doesn't matter.
There hasn't been a need for that yet, but if we decided to add those, they would go on the same extension class, follow the same pattern. The thing about get byte count and get char count is normally you would call those before calling get bytes and get char so that you know how much you need to allocate. But in this case, iBuffer writer is itself an unlimited sync, so you could just start writing without the need to allocate ahead of time. Like, the writer will do the allocations for you, or the rental, or whatever it needs to do dynamically.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, just as a scenario about if somebody wants to understand about how much data is going to be encoded before he go ahead and it's not about allocation, but it's about
I mean, okay, we could
decision.
If we wanted to, we could add that. It would return a long in both cases.
Yeah.
There is already a get byte count that takes a span, so we don't have to worry about that overload. So get byte count and get char count as well.
Do we have that already?
They are existing instance methods on system text encoding.
Yeah.
The idea would be to make them extension methods here as well.
All right, so we should add. So what would they look like?
So get byte count, this encoding in read-only sequence of chars.
I'm not that fast.
Okay. Basically, you see the one that takes in read-only sequence char and then writes to iBuffer writer a byte. It's the second function in the extensions.
So you say run the text encoding sequence and bytes?
The second function in the extensions that takes the encoding in sequence and then writes to a writer.
Yeah.
Copy that, delete the last parameter, and rename the method getByteCount.
All right. All right, getByteCount. And then we return a long?
Yes.
And we don't need that for
We would want it for char as well, I guess.
For read-only-span, we already have that, right?
Correct. It already exists.
All right. So then we need get char count, which takes an encoding and read-only sequence of
byte,
byte,
and then returns a long. Again, the fact that they return long is different than all of the other methods that return int, but it seems appropriate for the types that we're taking in.
Okay, so making mention and this is the if
Another thing that we could do is we could say, if we're okay with, in general, what the call sites would look like, then we could have a separate discussion as to whether to bring ReadOnlySequence and iBuffer writer down into system private core lib, but that shouldn't stop us from actually being able to work on this issue and create the implementation.
Oh, for sure not. The only problem is like the whole point of doing this will be to avoid having this extension type, right?
Yeah.
And so as long as we remember to not add it then later, fine. Otherwise,
well, I mean, is there anything wrong with us doing it in CoreFX now as an extension and then deciding later, hey, that really should
No, there is nothing wrong with it. It's just that it tends to be this kind of shit that we forget and then we shift it. And we move it to core lib and we shift the extension type, in which case it's like the worst of all worlds. But yeah.
Should I just open up an issue now then?
Yeah, I mean, that would be a good way to deal with it. Yeah. Anybody think of scenarios where we down? All right. Anybody else have anything to think? Otherwise, that's going to be my comment if I can find the window again. All right, for some reason. Boy. One of those mornings where clipboard doesn't work. All right, then.
There was one more.
Hold on, before we go down that path. What is the issue number you filed?
The issue number I filed is 41474.
41474?
Yep.
We can start working on this. No. The content you're editing has changed.
Yes, I fixed a typo in your stuff.
Oh. I also like how as soon as you hit enter, it goes back to the new one.
Mm-hmm.
And now you lose the one that I just entered. GitHub, you're stuck. Alright. Let me edit this again. Really effective this one.
You came for a discussion on the system text encoding types, right?
All right, let's try this again. All right, so what's the other one?
The other one is 41326. Basically the exact same thing, but instead of on the encoding class, on the encoder and decoder class. So if you're unaware of those classes, the system text encoding class is used when you have the entirety of a piece of data to convert. And so you say, here is my entire byte array, or my entire byte span, or now my entire byte read-only sequence. The encoder and decoder classes are when you need to perform something in a chunked fashion and you don't have all of the data immediately available. So this is used internally by things like StreamReader and StreamWriter. Because you don't know when the data is going to end, so you just keep calling this over and over and over. Eventually you pass flush when you're out of data. These APIs are also modeled on the existing convert methods on this class. Those existing convert methods are instance methods. One thing that is a bit strange here is there is a, what is it? Normally the convert method takes a span of bytes and a span of chars, and it will out, here's the number of bytes I read, here's the number of chars I wrote, and here's an out bool whether or not I actually completed my operation. Here, when you have a read-only sequence of bytes, it doesn't necessarily make sense to out a byte of bytes read. What you probably want to out is the sequence position instead. That way, the caller can immediately slice to that position. Or maybe it makes sense to out an int and then have the caller call slice int. This seemed more logical, though.
Yeah. I would prefer to keep it consistent.
Keep it as int, out int?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, what is the very next line the caller writes, though?
Slice.
And does inter sequence position make a difference then? Do I have to first get a position?
I am checking.
If we don't, then I agree with Tarek. If we do, then that kind of sucks, but...
I don't know about the runtime complexity of the different slice overloads.
Which slice overload are we talking about?
int64 versus sequence position.
The sequence position one is O of 1. The int64 one is O of the number of segments you have.
Even if the integer is positive?
That's right. On read-only sequence, yes.
Okay.
Well, you have to, like depending on how large the number is, right? It's basically O of the number of segments you have to advance, right?
That's right. Yeah.
It's not the number of segments you already read, right? So, yeah. I mean, which in practice now means you would have to read a really large string in order for this to make a difference, right?
You're just reading stuff off the network and it's chunked.
Question about the general API.
Yeah.
How come you're not using the operation status style for chunked encode, reading and writing?
Because this matches the existing instance methods on the encoding or on the encoder and decoder classes. It has nearly the same signature.
Sure, but at the same time, like when we added other APIs, especially in the encoding space, we didn't follow the existing instance methods, but we followed the operation status style. No?
No, not in the encoding namespace. Or not on the encoding class. They don't expose any operation status methods at all.
Okay.
The only methods that are operation status are methods that are completely brand new, unrelated to system text encoding. And part of the reason for that is you can't actually get an operation status back from an encoder or decoder because there's too much state stored internally, and we can't crack that state open and figure out what's actually meant.
I see. Gotcha.
So what's the verdict then on position versus int? Do we care?
So just as a point of interest, you'll notice some of these overloads don't out the number of bytes that were consumed. The reason for that is whenever you write into an iBuffer writer, you consume all of the data because your sync is unlimited. If your sync is unlimited, you always consume all of the data. So that's why they don't out anything.
Sorry, you lost me.
So you have the source and you have the destination, right? So if the source is a span or a sequence, and the destination is a writer, the destination is basically infinite. Like the writer will always be able to write more data.
I see.
That means that the writer is never going to be the thing that limits you, which means you're always going to read all of your source input. So in those cases, those APIs don't out anything for bytes read because they just read everything.
Consume all.
Yeah. The entire sequence or the entire span is consumed.
Makes sense.
Now, what we could say in order to be consistent is we could still out a bytes used or bytes read and always say, like, this is contractually guaranteed to be the entire length of the sequence.
Redundant.
It is, but remember at the last meeting we talked about stuff like gwid.try_write outing 16.
Yeah. I mean, for those it's kind of like different though, because you need that number. It's just whether you have that number given to you or whether you just know it off the top of your head is the difference. Versus here, you would never use the number.
Okay.
So you basically have an argument that you will never, that you have to assign to some local that you will never ever read from. So like, given that this guy already takes like 6 arguments, 7 arguments, and 2 of them are out, I'm not sure adding another out is like going to make people's life easier.
So, Asan, in your opinion, like, is it more usable to out the position rather than to out the number of bytes read?
Maybe, but I would have to think about like. So, see, for example, if you're outing the sequence position, then you're forced to slice the read-only sequence, correct?
Yes, but that's
actually
generally what people do anyway. That's the expected behavior after calling this method.
I see. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Primarily because if you return an int and there's no slice, then a lot of time that the slice will not be O1.
Yeah.
So you would out the position instead of a long or an int?
Yeah.
I think if you're passing in, then you're already agreeing to the contract of using position.
Would we call it bytes used position? That seems like a strange parameter name.
What does bytes used mean in that context?
It's normally bytes used would be the number of bytes that you read from the input source. In this case, we're not giving you the number of bytes that we read, we're giving you the position where we left off.
Yeah, which in which case bytes used position seems odd.
Bytes used is the parameter name used in every other overload of this method. That's why it was listed as that.
I see.
We could literally just call it sequence position with a lowercase s. Just say this is a special case. We're not necessarily concerned about making it consistent with the other parameter names.
When bytes used is unfortunate because it kind of makes it hard to combine with things like position, right?
Yeah.
Like sequence position bytes used is like, what would that mean? You kind of have to redoc.
Right.
You could also call it remainder or something like that.
That is basically the next position you should read from, right?
Yeah. Basically, slice here and then call me again.
Yeah. I mean, given that it's out, I don't know. It's kind of the yeah. I don't know, man. Resulting position is the best thing I can come up with, but that doesn't have any of the APIs we have so far.
Can you reiterate what it's supposed to mean? What is the device use position supposed to mean?
This is where we left off reading from. So the next time you call the convert method, you should pass me a read-only sequence that is sliced to this position.
It's the position
So,
after your data is.
Where you start, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the next start position, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the.
Yeah.
Well, when does convert go to end?
When does it not end?
Or when does it end?
So what convert will do is it will try to take as much data from the source as it can and transcode it into chars. There are a few reasons that it might not finish. The primary reason is that you're out of space in the destination and there's still source bytes remaining. Another reason that it might not finish is that the source is split across a multi-byte boundary. In that case, the bytes used position will point to the end of the input, but completed will return false. Completed basically means there is literally no, my internal state is reset. There's nothing interesting in me anymore. Because this is normally a, the encoder and decoder classes are state maintaining. They are actual classes that have internal state.
So, question: if they're state maintaining, why do we need to return sequence position and have the user slice the read-only sequence? Why don't we remember what position we were at and just continue from there?
Well, who would remember that?
Encoder and decoder classes don't have the only state they maintain is the last byte or two that they saw. They don't actually know anything about like the input type, like sequence span, anything like that.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. By the way, for context, like the UTF-8 JSON reader returns sequence position,
Yeah.
but it just calls it position.
Yeah. Position.
But that's a property. It's not a primary name.
Mhm. I mean, position's not a bad idea either.
I mean, honestly, I can go either one.
Position, next position.
Yeah. Because there's only going to be one position ever returned by these APIs.
It just
So-
has to be something that they can use to slice bytes to
Yeah,
the right
yeah.
spot. Hopefully as cheaply as possible.
Yes.
So, what do you want to call this? Position?
I'm fine with position, just by itself.
So decoders also have buffer, right?
They can have buffers, yeah.
Is it possible we can have like a special buffer for the sequences?
Well, remember, encoder and decoder are abstract-based classes.
Right.
So we can't assume that any derived implementation would understand this, right? This would,
Right,
if we
yeah.
tried to build knowledge of this into the base encoder and decoder, we would basically be adding a new abstract method which would break every implementation. So this has to be built solely on top of the old methods, which is possible.
Do we have usage sample of how this API would look like with the slicing? Like how would the caller call it?
There's, if you look in the unit test for encoder and decoder today, there are samples of calling the convert methods in a loop. There's also samples on MSDN for how to call the convert methods in a loop. In those cases, they're dealing with arrays, but you can imagine that they're dealing with read-only sequences instead. You would just call the slice method instead of allocating a new array segment.
And so position is going to be sequence position,
Yes.
because that's what it looks like slice generally takes, and what get position would return.
Or you mean the name or the type?
The type.
Yes.
It's going to be a sequence position.
Instead of an MTL.
Yeah.
I think that's
Well, it would have to be a long.
a long, yeah.
Yeah, because that's what.
It doesn't have to be a long. But yeah.
Yeah, because that's what read-only sequence get position currently returns is sequence position. I imagine that's what we then return, and then you slice from that.
By the way, you'll notice that for the destinations, We're also outing bytes used, chars used, like for the number of elements that I wrote to the writer or the span. I would prefer for those to be call written, but there is precedent that those parameters are called used instead of written.
Did they call what?
If you look at the other overloads of convert,
Yeah.
We out int used to represent the number of elements that we wrote instead of calling that parameter written.
Oh.
So as much as I don't like those parameter names, there's precedent, so I'm not going to fight it too much.
How much precedent?
On this particular type, the only precedent.
We generally try to be locally consistent more than
Yeah.
globally consistent because
Yeah.
it's more useful.
How much local?
Well, all other overloads basically use that
Yeah.
How many
nomenclature.
overloads are those though?
Let's say
3 or
12.
4.
How does it change your opinion?
I mean, that then becomes like 75%.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? Otherwise, fine with the API shape? I mean, it's the same argument as before, but if we move this down, then we probably should.
If you move it down, these would become
Yeah.
non-virtual methods.
We should
Or maybe they would be virtual, I don't know. They can't be abstract, though.
propose a language feature for a new attribute that we only put on our reference assemblies that says this is alternative names allowed for this particular parameter. So that way we can change it to be more correct and still be backwards compatible.
By the way, if you're moving these down or considering them, we should talk about nullability. Because for the last time when we talked about the AsSpan methods for list, we didn't consider nullability, and they lived in core lib.
Well, the only nullability here would be iBuffer writer and the input parameters. And I think we generally say inputs are not null.
Yeah.
And you can't do anything if writer's null other than throw.
Yeah,
so.
absolutely nothing here can be null. Same with the previous thing that we looked at.
Okay. So there's going to be no annotations on these APIs then?
Correct.
Imo, is that the general principle? Like if you have something that cannot be null and we do argument validation, we don't mark it as nullable?
So if something cannot be null and we don't do argument validation?
No, if we do argument validation in the method and to say if your argument was null, we throw, should the signature not have a question mark?
We have to do that. You have to check even if it has the annotation because you might be calling it from a version of the language that's not nullable away.
I think what he's asking is like, is there a point in marking things as nullable when you throw? And I would say no, because at that point you're lying to the caller. Like you're saying I accept null and then you blow up when you take null. Like that seems backwards.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
And many times our extension methods don't even check the this parameter for null.
All right.
And generally we're good about it, but not always consistent.
So
That's all
basically
I
that
have.
means they are not annotated, correct?
Correct.
And we have to find a way how we do that. Maybe we just should do the pragma nullable enable in the sample code so we know that people thought about it or something, but otherwise...
I mean, that would be easy enough to do here.
Yeah. I mean, just for the API review, because otherwise, like, how would we know that somebody ever thought about it?
Add a new label, nullability considered.
Well,
Make sure it's a color that Carol doesn't like.
how about this?
What did you change? Yes, that's fine.
Yep.
Close enough. All right, so then let me paste this guy in, and then I guess this one is API improved. That was easy.
It was. I
All
think
right.
it took 45 minutes of your time for 2 issues. All right.
Well, there's a reason why we have throughput issues. All right. So we already skipped those guys. I think last time we talked about CollectionMarshal, we did not finish. Should we continue and like finally get
Oh
this going?
no! So we did finish that.
Okay.
There was
Yeah.
one tweak based on feedback that Jan and others gave in the actual implementation that we just need to make sure we've addressed and said that's okay.
Okay.
Namely, it was
Back.
we had previously said the approved API was both AsSpan and AsReadOnlySpan, with AsSpan mutating the version. The implementation that was suggested by Jan and due to feedback from Ben as well was We just have AsSpan, and it doesn't increment the version because it doesn't match the underlying semantics of mutating anyways.
Yeah.
I like that.
Sorry, Asim, you were saying you cut out earlier.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that I marked it back as ready for review and added a note for what you want, what changed.
Okay, yeah.
Why do we want list to be nullable in this case?
It will return an empty span, I believe, if list is null.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that would actually be this list of two, but yeah.
And we're doing that for it to behave similarly with both string and arrays.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I'm asking, is that the case?
That's why, yeah. Actually, no, you're right. This is not this. It's just regular list of T, yeah. We don't do extension methods on Marshall.
But yeah, for most of the APIs that return span, since you can create a span around null, we just say accept null and return default.
Yeah.
What was the rationale for not changing the version number?
Once you get the span back, writing to the span directly isn't going to increment the version number of the list, so why change the version number at the time when you get the span?
Yeah, because normal list semantics is every change to the underlying data mutates the version.
And just getting the span hasn't mutated the data.
Presumably, if you get a writable span,
yeah, that was what I said as well, but Jan and Ben both pushed back against that.
One of the other arguments that they deployed was that this is an unsafe operation, and once you're dealing with unsafe, like, why are we checking version
I think
numbers?
I mentioned that last time, but I think I was the only one in the room, but I kind of assumed that that was Jan's position on this. It's one of those APIs where, like, when you go down their path, there are no more protections for you. You know,
you could cause problems, yeah.
Which is why we removed the overload. All right, so then we are back to this. All right. Sweet. Right. I like how this is always popping in the wrong window. I really need to do something about this. This is not helping my game.
412 days ago.
Yeah, we're not fast.
Yeah. Did you write a little desktop app?
I did.
Didn't you just finish porting it to Net Core 3?
I did.
How much faster is it?
Well, the funny thing is with the tooling that we demoed at .NET Conf, it took me 90 minutes, which is pretty good for 90 projects and approximately 400,000 lines of code. Anyway, so where are we with this? Did we ever review this issue?
I think we did previously, and I remember what we did is we said, let's try it out internally first to, run it through its courses before we make it public. And it's currently used by arraypoolofT.shared.
So let me actually...
Is this one that we should have Mayoni in the room for?
Well, that's why I'm trying to get like what changed since the last time. So we basically should just return allocate array in the end, the developer controls the size. Move on.
So is this just uninitialized allocation? Is that the benefit over just saying new?
It goes on the large object heap.
Yeah, and I think there's some variation of the API that also allows forced pinning of the data. There was a few variations, I think. gone through and ended up being proposed.
Holy shit, there's a lot of.
When did it get marked ready for review?
It must be in the middle. There's again this 24 hidden items thingy.
2018.
So API. Alright. Jan edited that in September last year.
Well, I thought it got okay. Whatever.
Alright, so let me actually go back to the top then. I think so. The only feedback we had was we wanted initialized and uninitialized to be different methods and not just a Boolean. And I think that was pretty much the only feedback we had. And looking at the API proposal, that seems to be kind of what it is now. So
I can't. Sorry, are you? Oh, okay, maybe the screen just didn't catch up. I see it now.
yeah. So that seems fine.
So but most of this stuff isn't currently implemented, right? Like, I'm a little concerned about exposing API like this.
Yeah. So allocate uninitialized array is internally implemented right now.
Yeah, but not all of these. Like, if you pass pin true, does that work? If you pass generation 2, does that work?
I believe it does not work. I don't think the API internally looks like this.
Right, I think for the initial implementation that Vlad and Mayoni worked on, they just did a minimal subset of what was required for internal use.
Yeah.
But things like pinning and stuff were also on the table and under consideration. They just weren't needed for 3.0.
Well, I mean, so I guess to Stephen's point, like, I mean, I'm okay with approving an API if we don't have an implementation yet, but I would be concerned if we approve an API for which we will never have an implementation. That seems bad.
Yeah, we would just need a confirmation from them that they actually plan on getting to all of this.
Yeah.
Like, because some of these I don't know what the parameters mean, but sure.
I think length and generation makes sense to me. Pin makes sense to me.
Pin doesn't make sense to me.
Why?
What does it mean?
Well, you get back an array that's already pinned.
Yeah,
what does already pinned mean?
It means that the GC will never move it.
You cannot move it. Yeah.
It's like an RVA static. It will never be moved.
But it's still GCable. So you still need to put it inside of a fixed statement if you want to get a pointer to it and not have the GC reclaim it out from under you.
I think it's, if you want to write C# code, you would need to put a fixed statement, but you could technically safely use unsafe as pointer to get...
Which means you need to know that the array was already generated using this one very particular flag.
Well, so the reason why they have it is, by the way,
internal,
they're saying we provide a pinned heap.
Yeah.
So when they allocate, they put it on a different heap. So that's why they don't want to.
I guess my problem with that particular parameter is the entity which creates the array and passes pinned true is likely to be a different entity than the thing that actually consumes the array.
Yeah.
And how does the consumer know what parameter the creator passed in for that argument?
Why is he care about?
Well, because it seems like the consumer is always going to have to say fixed byte star my array equals array, and at that point, what's the purpose of the parameter?
Well, I think it's more like in the cases where you would use this, you're not meant to be taking it. It's for internal usage, not necessarily for public use. So, like, you know, if this is an array coming from your internal data structures, you can know it's pinned, and you can rely on that implementation detail.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you're ML and you need to allocate, you know, a 2 GB array of floats because you're gonna walk them, you want that pin. You don't want it moved. You don't want to deal with the native memory allocation there. And you can rely on, you can call unsafe as pointer.
So what I would
but to be clear, I don't think it's about the, avoiding the get, calling the API that does the pinning. I think it's more about, because you already know that you will pin this thing eventually, you want to be allocated in a different heap.
So I would say the parameter should probably not be called pinned. It should probably be called something like immovable or something along those lines. Because pinned has a very defined meaning from, like, C# and everything else. Like pinned,
but
basically,
this is GC terminology. I mean, like,
Yeah,
People understand like pinning what means for GC.
Does GC actually have a predefined concept called like a pinned heap or a pinned array?
That's what they're adding with this
GC
API.
handle, I think they have like
they
pin
expose
object.
pin.
It has a concept of a pinned object, but that pinned object just exists in the standard array.
Right.
There's just a special handle to it.
Right. Well, this
Or
is,
in the standard heap, sorry.
this would still exist in the GC.
Not in the standard heap, though.
Yeah, but the heap it lives in doesn't matter. That's only important to the GC itself, and
Yes.
this lets the GC know this is going to be pinned. It needs to be pinned long term.
Yes.
So don't worry about like trying to rationalize moving objects.
Right, and
around
that's
everything
kind of the
else.
point I'm getting at. Like there's already an understanding of what the word pinned means with regard to like language, the GC, everything else, and please put this into a completely different heap does not mesh with everyone's existing understanding of the word pinned.
But what, like, so that's what I'm trying to get is like, how does it make a difference to you?
It's just parameter name, that's all.
No, I mean, like, how would the resulting usage, like, what assumptions would the user make that would cause incorrect usage on his side? Because in order for you to get, a fixed, you still have to put in a fixed statement. So you still have to do whatever the transitions are that you have to do today to get to a pinned object. I probably wouldn't do the unsafe cast that Tanner suggested because it's like, well, I don't know how the GC
It
works.
sounds like what you really want is that parameter is actually saying, please put me on a heap that will never cause fragmentation due to GC.
Basically.
Is it about causing fragmentation, or just I don't want this memory moved? If I'm going to use buffer for some I/O, it could be beneficial just to say I never want this moved because I'm going to keep pinning it over and over again.
Well,
That doesn't matter though.
The exact thing that Manny put in the proposal is we'll provide a pinned heap that are only for objects pinned via this API. It's for scenarios where you have control over the allocation of the object you want to pin, and you want to pin it as long as it's alive.
Yes.
It will not be we will not be compacting this heap, or we will not be compacting, so fragmentation may be a problem. As with normal pinning, it should be used with caution.
Yeah.
I think it, like, from the perspective of the external user, it is pinned, and it doesn't matter that it's in a new heap. And if Mayoni's comfortable with it being in a separate heap on her end, being the GC expert, then I think it's probably fine.
Okay.
From the internal implementation perspective.
Does the user can unpin it?
No.
Okay, so maybe, the parameter can be like pin it forever, or like, or like permanent bin.
What the parameter really means is I want you to put this on a special heap that standard objects don't live in. Like that's really what the parameter means.
Well, and then she also put, I would like to limit T for the pinning case to be unmanaged, contain no references.
Yeah.
So,
which makes sense.
But I mean, you could technically today create an object, use GC handle to pin it, and then keep it pinned for the lifetime of the object.
Oh yeah, I do that all the time.
No different.
Yeah.
So,
but it exists in the standard heap though, which means that the GC now has to work extra hard to kind of shuffle stuff around it.
Right, but to everyone consuming it, they don't know that it's pinned,
right,
and things like that.
Right,
it becomes an internal implementation detail at that point, and so I think this is more. It's called pin to give context to the user. You're effectively pinning this for the lifetime.
Yeah.
No one else will know this unless you've told them this. So.
Okay. Sure. Pinned it is then.
Can you remind me again about like why we have initialized and uninitialized APIs, and why?
Because allocate array gives you back a zero initialized array. Allocate uninitialized array will not do that. It will just give you a raw memory. Because if you already know that
why we have two APIs with the same parameters.
The reason being that originally they proposed a single API where they basically just have another parameter that says true false. The reason we don't like it because when you look from the code side, one of them is substantially more unsafe than the other, and it should stand out more than just a true false pass to the API. It's just about that. Because if you call allocate uninitialized array, that sounds more dangerous than allocate array, and then somewhere the fourth argument you pass false. You're gonna have to know that, that means you get uninitialized memory, so I probably should care about what I'm doing next. That was basically the rationale. All right. Anybody else? Anything
Allocate
else?
an initialized array violates type safety, is what it comes down to. Like, that's why.
Right.
The only other thing that Moni said is like maybe when you pass in pin true, you may be able to have a T that has reference types in them.
That seems fine.
But that's
Yeah, that would cover the majority of scenarios for. It would cover basically everything except for having other arrays that exist within the pinned key. So you couldn't, for example, have a struct of float arrays and
Right.
do AOS.
Yeah.
But she said she was open to further discussion, so maybe that particular case could be allowed or something.
I would imagine it was just not wanting the GC to have to walk that entire heap during a collection.
Yep, this
That
is similar
makes sense.
discussion we had the other day.
Yeah. Makes sense.
all right. Then we're on fire. 3 issues. Okay, I'm exaggerating mildly, but
More of a slow smolder.
I guess the one thing that might be worth saying is if we are going to restrict pinned to be unmanaged effectively, and if it's always going to be restricted to that, then maybe you could have an explicit overload of allocate pinned uninitialized array where T is unmanaged. If you wanted that to be explicit. Or just tell people, this will throw out runtime if it's not.
Yeah, well, that's the current behavior,
Right.
So,
the problem with these kind of things is that it has bad combinatorics, right?
Right, and if we decide to allow it in the future, then
Yeah, you have the API problem. Yeah.
great. So GetPosition just returns the element index in the sequence.
Something like this already exists.
I thought I saw something when I was just looking at it. No, I guess not. There's get position that takes a long and returns a sequence position.
Yes. Basically, you want the long from the position, right? I mean, so as Paolo suggested, you could do slice 0, position dot length. That's logically the same thing.
So this covers the case where you have a sequence position and you want to get the long position out of it. There's another overload for get position that takes long offset sequence position origin, which gives you an offset from a position origin as a new sequence position. Would you do that as get position offset origin?
So where do you see this API? On ReadOnlySequence?
Yeah, on ReadOnlySequence.
There is
2 overloads of get position right now.
yeah, but that's different, right? That's kind of like offset plus origin, or origin plus offset.
Right, but I was saying if this one's also called get position and someone wanted that same thing, we couldn't overload based on that. We could only expose this, and you'd have to do 2 nested calls.
What will be the runtime complexity of this function?
Of which one? The new one?
Position of the new one, yeah.
That should be pretty much 01 because you.
Just getting the base position from
Basically, you get the
sequence node.
the node from the object data into the position, and then you just plus in the position. I mean, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm relatively sure. So I still don't understand your overload concern.
Well, so there's 2 overloads for get position today. This
Right.
one effectively provides a get position overload for the first one. we couldn't provide an overload for the second one ever because then there'd be conflict for the input type. So do we want to give this a different name? Or do we want to say user?
I'm really slow. I really don't understand.
What's the overload conflict here?
Yeah, I don't understand.
So
there's two overloads of GetPosition today.
Yep.
Yes.
One takes a long offset, returns a sequence position. The other one takes a long offset and a sequence position start and returns a new sequence position.
Yes.
This is effectively the opposite of the first. It takes the sequence position and returns the overall offset.
Right.
Yes.
If we wanted to also have, and we could not also provide a corresponding version for this of the second overload.
Right, because the parameters will be flipped. That's the only way we'd be able to do that.
Right.
Okay.
So do we want to give this a potentially different name, like get offset, or do we want to?
Yeah, I think position has kind of a defined name.
Yes.
Meaning within sequence, so I would call it get offset or get index. Something like that.
Would this be get offset from origin specifically, or?
Yeah, I think this one is effectively get offset from origin in the position.
I just don't understand. Like the logical overload to the one that takes two arguments would be either taking two longs or taking two positions. No.
No, because you want an offset from. So this one here is saying, get me the offset of this sequence position. So you're basically getting the sequence position start and then computing the total offset into the sequence using that. The second one is saying, give me an offset from this sequence position. So you're offsetting into the sequence position a little bit and getting that total offset.
But that's just an arithmetic operation, though. Like, would we actually want an overload for that method?
Yeah, also that overload basically is already the sequence position. Like it's the resulting value, right?
Well, it's an additional operation, right? Because like this would also do, like long offset sequence position origin also handles the case where offset is greater than the origin length, right?
Yeah.
In cases like that. So it's not just like add; it's add with some additional checking and logic.
I guess I'm still not.
To be honest, I would probably call it get offset anyway, because the existing overload of get position is get position long offset returns a position. So get offset sequence position returns long offset. Like there's a natural symmetry there.
Yeah, honestly, get offset makes more sense to me. But more for the argument you said.
Yeah. And if we wanted to add that other overload in the future, we could, and we wouldn't have the conflict that Tanner had mentioned. I don't know if we would ever add that other overload, because you could just write a plus and go about your business. So, well, there's no need for us to have an API that represents add.
Yeah, I agree with that, but
I'm probably just really bad at it.
Given that the normalization uses offset for normal position sequence, we should be using this also solves some overload problem that only Tanner understands.
You should have said that only Tanner thinks exists.
No, that would be judgmental. I'm not doing that.
No, because it's entirely possible it doesn't exist.
All right. All right. Another one down. Well, I'm not a color expert, but
I kind of am.
API was good.
Oh, I think this is the one that. Yeah, I know the community member that proposed this.
HSL is very frequently used, but it's never really a good.
Explain.
You are talking about the color?
So as the hue changes, the actual luminance of the color result changes too. So the hue plus lumosity here, like it's kind of a lie. If you implement a color wheel, you'll see it like fade dark and light as you. I mean, it's frequently used. I think it could be good, but representing some other color spaces might be.
But is that because of the way our colors are represented, that they are not precise enough to not have the hue, sorry, the luminosity change, or is it just a fundamental thing of the color space?
Yeah, it's a flaw of HSL.
I see.
But this is an operation that most color APIs end up providing.
Yeah.
We should likely be providing it as well.
So
I would say, though, I would rather see this potentially be alpha equals
Right.
byte.max value.
If the rest of
Basically,
them
the
are
only-
float, why is alpha?
So right now
That I
on
don't
color,
know.
RGB and A are all byte. Like right now, color is a 32-bit structure, and I can't
Right.
imagine us changing that.
There is a separate proposal asking for us to support other types of colors.
Sure, that would be a different
Yeah.
type, right?
Yeah.
So that will not change this one. So I mean, how, like, what ends up happening basically? So when you say, how do you ever get the hue and saturation luminosity out of this color?
There's already a get hue, get saturation API. There's not get luminosity though.
Interesting. So we're already halfway there.
Yeah, we literally have APIs for get hue and get saturation.
Interesting.
Oh, get brightness. Yes, we call it brightness, not luminosity.
Of course.
But yes, we have APIs to get all three of those.
And they return floats?
They do.
That's funny. Well, in that case, that seems like a general goodness, because you're already like, it's a bit unfortunate that we called it.
Is the standard term lumosity or lightness?
Standard term is luminosity. Yeah.
Luminosity.
Yeah, that's why it's HSL.
Also, HSL is different from HSB. So brightness and lumosity would technically be different.
What are we doing in our implementation?
We are returning, I believe, the average of RG and B.
I think there's an emoji for what the current behavior is. It's like this.
Oh no, we're not returning the average. We're doing, I don't know what we're doing.
Is it on source.net or did you have to?
Reference source, but I can't imagine it's changed. This, yeah.
It looks like we're just returning.
Max?
Yeah, I'm not really sure what that is.
We're returning something that resembles an average.
It
looks like it
an
averages the
Yes.
minimum and the maximum component.
Yes. We take the two extremes, we throw away the middle one, and then we average the two extremes.
I think there's a name for that. I'm not actually joking. I think there's actually a standard term for that. I'm fairly confident.
So if there is a proper way to compute the to compute the luminosity and return it, like should we actually add that as an API as well?
Hold on, I'm
Yeah.
double checking
Or we should call this from HSB. It depends on what brightness actually means. I can't remember the algorithm offhand.
Like maybe this algorithm is correct. I don't know enough about color spaces. I know they're not taking into account the fact that the human eye perceives the different colors, brightnesses differently.
Yeah.
So you're saying HSB is not the same as HSL?
We could add a LSHU color space for that.
Sounds like we want a different color type. Actually, just a list of float, where the float is the wavelength of the constituent component of the color.
Okay, so let me make sure I write things down.
Has anyone commented with this
So
research already?
no, I just searched for brightness. I couldn't find anything with that. I didn't search for HSB. No. But looking at the sample code, like if you look, let me actually scroll down here somewhere. Blah 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 blah, like stuff like this here. Like if you search for brightness, like it seems that people use the brightness,
Okay.
which seems to suggest what you said earlier. It's like they really mean HSB, because I just found another Stack Overflow answer, but somebody said the same thing you said. There's HSL, and then there's HSB, which is the same as HSV, which is basically brightness, or I think there's also HSI, which is something similar apparently. So, given, yeah, it sounds like.
Yeah, we're just doing the standard luminosity equation, and we call it brightness.
L is different from HSV.
So we call it luminosity, or we call it brightness, but it's really luminosity?
That's what it looks like. I'm comparing to the known good HSL implementation from the DirectX math library.
Okay.
But that's also vectorized code, so it's a bit hard to compare one-to-one.
Does it... We had said that there was a proposal for like an extended color type or something like that. Like, would it just make sense to make all of these changes in only that type and leave this one as is?
Maybe, but there's the extended color type, we might want to be part of a like bigger library maybe, because there's been people wanting something that's not system drawing for a while.
Yeah.
Since system drawing isn't consistent cross-platform and it's GDI based and things like that. Plus, there's the issue of some people want color to be 4 floats, some people want it to be 4 bytes. There's, if you look at Vulkan or DirectX or any other API, there's well over 200 formats that you could pick from.
Yeah.
So really, we might need a
color
RGB of T and color RGBA of T, or color 3 and 4 of T, where you can then define what those are and provide some core operations on.
Yeah, I think just looking at in terms of scoping on color, it makes sense to have some parity here. I know this is a common operation.
Does GDI Plus have something with it? Do you know that?
I'm not about GDI Plus.
Not sure. It's been so long since it...
Yeah.
All right. I just bounced it back. I just wrote down basically what we just said, and then let the person come back with. Also pinged our friend Jimmy Bob Squarepants, because he runs image processing, whether he has an opinion on that. And then we leave that as it is. All right, so now where is the window again? Ooh. Extend CultureInfo, GetCultureInfo, and new CultureInfo to optionally accept predefined cultures. Oh boy.
Custom cultures? What does that mean?
You can pass.
Yeah.
You can pass like known root culture hyphen anything, and sometimes it will just fabricate a culture out of thin air based on the root.
So starting Windows 10, Windows team started to support any culture name that it's conform to the what they call PCB 47 standard. So it doesn't mean like Windows carry any data for this culture, but Windows try to fake some data for it.
Okay, so
So
we'll just
this proposal, I think they want to make sure that when they request some specific culture, they want to ensure that the Windows or the operating system has data for it.
Would this be a breaking change, or would we want like a get exact code?
It's
No, we will return exact culture if it is if the operating system have a data for this culture, real data.
Yeah.
And it will throw if it doesn't.
Yeah.
Today we will not throw because Windows fake it.
So, for instance, I'm calling GetCultureInfo and just passing in 2 characters hyphen 2 characters.
Oh, and it just
It's
gives
like,
you
I
whatever.
don't know what you mean.
Okay.
So it just as unknown. Yeah. The reason that this is interesting also is because a lot of web servers cache this information. So, for example, like looking up culture information is a bit expensive. So a lot of web servers will say, well, let's look at the requested culture that's coming in the request header, and I'm going to look at the cache that I've been building up, and if I don't see it, I'm going to call GetCultureInfo and then populate the cache. Generally speaking, they rely on the GetCultureInfo to throw an exception, but this would allow somebody to just like blow up the cache by populating it with 4 billion elements, basically. Not 4 billion, but an enormous number of elements.
So basically the idea is that if you call GetCultureInfo and you say predefined only true, then it will just return null if it can't find it. Is that the idea? As opposed to creating it?
Yeah, this doesn't seem like it would blow up the cache or do what you're saying of asking it to throw.
Yeah. Basically, people who would be caching these need a way to say, or need a way to tell you gave me back something fake instead of something you actually knew about. Because 250 or 26 to the power of 4 is around 500,000. So caching 500,000 things is obviously a non-starter.
Can you scroll down? What is the proposed API here?
Sorry, I already did this on my screen.
The interesting thing is implementation here, so I'm not sure. Like maybe in Windows we can detect if the culture is really fake or real.
It looks like a very particular code page is given back for the fabricated culture, so we can detect that in thread.
In Windows they create like the English name for it. They put something. I don't remember the name, but they put something like telling like this is not really real culture.
Right. Well, there's the locale ID of 4096, which might also be
but we have really some real culture
with that ID.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. So the question is in Linux and while using ICU, how we are going to do that? I'm not sure because also ICU have something called the alias culture, which is like it's just alias to some other culture. So is this real culture or not real culture?
Conceptually, I think it's not a bad idea, but I guess we would need to see if it can be implemented.
Yeah.
I think
I bet it could be implemented.
I think PowerShell is a team wanting this idea.
Have a predefined only parameter, or would we like a completely different overload?
Also, I don't like. Why would you want this to throw an exception?
Because we throw exception.
No, I get that, but like, why would you not just have an overload like try get culture by name or something?
Yeah, this would be much better actually.
It seems a bit backwards to say like, you know, oh, I just catch the exception to validate. Like,
actually, we implemented this internally. I mean, like, because at some time we need to create cultures that doesn't throw.
Okay, that makes more sense to me now.
Is
Or maybe
there a try get culture already right now?
No, we don't.
Yeah, Ben picked me on Twitter. He said, check your chat log.
He pinged me too. he pulled up some, Ben in YouTube chat pulled up additional references for where we're using pinned already in the surface area, like for example, memory marshal create from pinned array, and other places where we're using pin to create basically permanently pinned objects. So
yeah, so back to this, I would probably call this bool, static bool, try get predefined culture or something.
No,
right?
I mean,
think
just
try
call
get
it
culture
try
is
get culture. And we use it in generally. I mean, it's not for this specific scenario.
So the behavior of try-get culture would be we don't allow fabricating cultures under the covers.
No, we still have this parameter can pass it. I mean, so try get culture info will take this, the culture name and this boolean telling like.
I actually don't know if I like that because typically you would expect the opposite of try to throw. We're returning a dummy culture, kind of you don't have that symmetry that you get all over the rest of .NET.
Well, it could still fail if you pass in something that's not a legal culture name.
right, but I think the difference is normally we would do it such that the non-try version is effectively if try returns false, throw.
Yeah.
That's typically how we implement it, and that wouldn't be the case here, which may be confusing to users.
Yeah, that's why I said try predefined culture.
Yeah.
Because get culture will always create one, right?
So we have datetime.parse exact. Would it make sense to try get the exact culture, something like that?
Try get culture exact, I think would be the. But it seems
But
like.
I am still don't like the name because I'm hoping that this new API we can use it in even in main scenarios. It doesn't mean like somebody read real culture or not.
So maybe I don't understand, but I thought the idea of the API was that the name you pass in must be in some predefined table, and if it's not, you return false. Is that not what the ask is?
This is what they need, yes. But today, as I mentioned, about like if you pass name that it's not in the table at all, so Windows is, or even ICU can create your culture for it and give it to you, right? And this is the main scenario. This is not the main scenario.
But my question is, there's two ways to implement the API. One is I only check against the predefined entries, or I basically go down the other path and say, well, if you pass me a culture that didn't exist, I will add it to this table. And when you say try get value, I basically check against the predefined things and whatever else you created before. Or are we saying try get culture will only ever use the things that were basically like are well known effectively, no matter what get culture calls you had before? Like, would you expect to say get culture foo get culture bar, and then I can say try get culture bar, and then it would return true because you already registered it, or would you expect it to fail?
Forget about registration. This is implementation details. I mean, we don't register anything. So we just call the OS telling like, I have this culture name, please give me a culture data for it. And Windows today, it will give you data anyway, right? And at that time, we will check the data to see if it is fake or not, to handle this case.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm asking is when you do ignore the new API, if you say get culture foo today, and then I call get culture foo again, assuming foo is not a predefined culture, do I get two different instances, or do I get the same instance on the same?
If you say get culture info, yeah, you will get the same instance. If you say new culture info, you will get a new instance. And also there is another API which is called the clear cache, which can clear the cache, and if you call like get culture info, you will get instance, clear the cache, get culture info, you will get a new instance.
So then the question is, try get culture would you expect it to return true when I provide a name that get culture name would return a predefined instance for, rather than creating a new one?
So if we have try get culture info, it should return true if we, okay. If we just passing the culture info only, it should return true if we can create this culture. It doesn't matter if there is a real data or not for it. This is my stand. But if we can add this parameter to the try get culture info, which is saying like predefined only, so the try get culture will take the culture name and another parameter is called predefined only. At that time, we return true only if we can get a culture that have real data.
So when predefined only, you're defining to mean exact match, correct? So if I try getting the culture info for fr-us, for instance, like there is no such culture defined, but the culture that's fabricated will have aspects of French as its base because it inherits the parent. Yeah. So is there not still utility in being able to fabricate something like that out of thin air?
Yeah, Windows can fabricate that.
Yes.
And this is what I was telling about, like implementation wise.
Right.
We need to figure out about like the way to understand which is real fabricated or real.
So this is, it sounds almost like, if you want to get down to it, we actually need an enum, not a bool for that last parameter, where that enum is give me only an exact match if you can find it, or allow fabricating something that goes up to the correct parent, or just fabricate something out of thin air. So for example, if you passed in fr-us and fr-us doesn't exist, but fr does, then you could return just fr by itself. And you would get at least the right parent culture information, right?
If I pass fr-us and
yes.
we don't have fr-us, we cannot return fr on.
No, but isn't that what I guess what I was arguing is it sounds like there's room for a more general get culture info API that takes an enum for how things should work, where the enum controls what value you have.
I wouldn't go to that level. I mean, like,
there will be 3.
I think this scenario specifically, people saying like, you know, if Windows carry this real culture data, the complete culture data or not. I mean, this is the scenario they care about.
Okay. And then if the caller wants to allow going up to the parent, then the caller just strips stuff off on their own and figures it out.
So, okay, so then I guess what my question is, when they say predefined only, what do they mean by that? Do they mean like,
exact match?
So fr-us would be not predefined because there's no such thing.
Yes.
What about?
In another word, sorry to interrupt you, but we have get cultures, which is enumerate all cultures on the system.
Mm-hmm.
This enumerate only the built-in, I mean the cultures that have real data in Windows.
Yeah.
It will not have en like fr-us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. This means that fr-us is not real culture.
So the documentation for this, it will only return a culture if it exists. Right. If this other method would return it.
Yeah. The behavior of this today is that when they fabricate a culture, they think of a culture as like a nested hierarchy, basically. Like if you can't find fr-us, they'll fabricate fr-us, but they'll give it the behaviors of just regular fr. So it would have it would have things like the numeric representation and other textual elements of French, as opposed to the invariant culture, which is English. Because, well, fr-us doesn't exist, but fr does. So the thing that we fabricate will be based off of that. That's the current behavior, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, so that means basically get culture info or new culture info. They have the same behavior, except the new culture info will always create a new instance no matter what, right?
Right.
And so is it then fair to say, like, the overload that he really wants or she really wants is basically just a way to confine the name to this built-in list?
What happens when a user uses the system APIs to go and register their own custom culture at the OS level, and how does this work on Unix?
So on Windows, it would get enumerated properly, so it would exist.
Right, but
I don't know that I see that.
do they necessarily want that as part? Because that's realistically no different from the user going and creating a custom culture on the .NET side and passing it.
Well, I would say if you go through the trouble of registering a system-wide thing, then
like if your admin has done this, then your application's going on, right?
I think at that point you consider it a built-in thing because somebody went out of their way to make it built-in.
Yeah.
I
don't know about ICU though. Are you more familiar with that, Tara?
Yeah, there is a way that you can extend the locales in Linux in general. Yeah. Which is ICU can reflect on that.
So,
actually, people can build their own culture, more culture into the ICU.
Yeah.
So would we?
Nothing will prevent them.
So what were we circling around? Try get culture with a bool or try get exact culture?
Yeah, I mean, like, to me, if we consider the parameter to be called predefined, that's why I went with try predefined culture because it seems like that's what the ask is for. But I also have no trouble with saying try get culture info, and then say string name, comma, bool predefined only, and then out culture info, and I can do either one, right?
So if you follow reflection, which has some parameters that take a bool, some of those parameter names are things like exact match only. So that might influence our decision here.
Yeah, to me, I don't know. To me, predefined or exact match are. I think predefined makes more sense to me than exact match. Exact match sounds more like string parsing or something, but.
Well,
yeah.
You know, something Tanner said, does predefined mean what was built into Windows or what you also defined after predefined list? So it doesn't quite.
You could call it system-defined, right?
Yeah, system-defined. Predefined in this case would mean anything that you can query the OS about or your environment and get information back.
Does predefined imply the wrong thing? If the program starts, then they call an API which creates the culture, and then call this.
Yeah, that's exactly like.
True.
I feel like exact is a little more meaningful to what we want it to be, whereas predefined has questions. I don't know who would ask those questions.
What exact means?
Yeah.
I mean, does it follow aliases and things like that as well, right?
Yeah, exactly will not be that obvious for anybody reading. Like,
that's right. Okay, so not try get predefined, but try get culture taking predefined as a bool.
We can say like built-in only. Maybe.
I mean, that's what I currently just hacked up, but like, I have no. Like, the one thing that I think would be bad is this overload, right? Just without this. Because that kind of implies it's the counterpart to get culture. So this should only return false where culture currently throws.
Yeah. Which
is not what we want, right? So you need clearly either a different name or some additional parameter that allows you to say, I really only want some subset of that.
The reason that I had said exact previously is that, like, if I pass in fr-us, I don't want you to give me fr. Like, I want you to give me fr-us or nothing.
I think exact is probably the thing that best explains. I want something that exactly matches name or nothing.
So then my other question is, what happens with like things like get culture when you fabricate fr-us before you do that, and then you call this API? Do you expect it to return true or false?
False, because it's not exact.
But you could query the thing by calling get culture.
Yeah.
You would get it back.
But it fabricated
one when you call
only on the first attempt. The second one, it returns the existing instance, apparently.
It does, yes, but that's because it keeps an internal cache of everything that it's created or seen.
But that's just a caching behavior. It's not a guarantee.
It's probably a guarantee, but.
Well, I don't think the system would register it as a culture in the system.
No, the system certainly wouldn't do
it. So you should still be able to detect that fr-us is a fabricated thing.
Yeah, if you pass in true here, I wouldn't expect this API to return true for anything that it fabricated, for anything that it didn't actually get from the OS directory.
Yeah, basically, the predefined really only applies to the OS, but it doesn't apply to what .NET things is in its cache, right?
Exactly.
So that's why, to me, exact match or predefined neither of them convey that, right? Like that's why system defined made the most sense to me, but I also don't. Like I can go either way, but because it seems like you need to write docs anyway to explain what this thing does, and so at that point you might as well.
We already call it today installed cultures. We actually have flags on CultureInfo today that tell you where the culture came from, and those flags are installed Win32 cultures, framework cultures, neutral cultures.
Oh my god.
Would it make sense to pass
those
that
are
flags
duplicated.
here?
Most of those are duplicated.
Right.
Looks like PowerShell back in October of last year added 3 new parameters to their Git culture commandlet. One is name, the second is no user overrides, and the third is list available. So they call theirs effectively no user override.
No, user override is different things here.
Yeah.
It's even.
Okay.
I like all this. They have like 600 different flavors of the same thing.
User override is like, the user can go and override some properties. Like, for current culture, they can go to and say like, I don't want like dot decimal point, I need it comma. Right?
I thought cultures were immutable in framework.
If it's not, it's immutable, but the user override is the system, is the user, I mean, it gets stored in the JSON, not us.
Yeah.
So when we call the OS to get the data, you can tell the data, do you want the user override or do you want the real data?
So we have an enum already telling you what type of culture info it is. Would it make sense?
Yeah,
to
this
pass the
enum is.
Yeah, I don't know if I would take that enum.
No.
So just to get the behavior out of the way. So the behavior would be, if that second parameter is true, the culture that you get back is going to be exactly that or nothing. If the parameter that you pass is false, the culture you get back could be the closest approximation the system could come up with,
Right.
or nothing.
Which is the same thing as get culture today. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you pass in false, there's no guarantee as to what you get back. You could get back nothing, or you could get back an approximation.
Yeah, to me, when you say name, comma, false, it's the same behavior of get culture.
Okay.
Except when get culture would have thrown, this probably returns false.
Yeah.
Would this method throw if name is malformed?
I think based on
It
API
depends.
design guidelines, yes.
It
Yes.
depends what malform. Like
Malformed is in like XYZ-ABC. Like that's
this is a PCP 47 standard. So
Yes.
this is not malformed.
So get culture only throws
Malformed
from
also
malformed names?
only is like, if you say something like whatever,
Yeah.
question mark dash 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 dash.
Yeah.
This
Like-
is mal-
yeah. If you pass that into Get Culture Info today, like it will
Will
throw an
throw.
exception because it's like this is completely meaningless.
right.
Like I can't even begin to parse this thing.
I think people often use try methods for parsing user input, though.
Yes.
So I wouldn't want it to. I just want it to return false.
Yeah, this is why try get culture would be useful.
So this will also return false if the input is malformed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, which I think
Yeah.
violates
Not
the
wrong.
design
I
guidelines.
think it does too.
Because the design guidelines say that the bool should only represent one failure case. So
Yes.
it should
Yeah.
represent either invalid input or it should represent we couldn't find an exact match,
Yes.
which would mean we would need to call this try get exact and not have a bool parameter to respect the framework design. Where is Jeremy?
He's out right now.
Okay.
The other idea to have like 2 APIs instead of one. I mean like one which is try get culture, text names and the out parameter only.
Mhm.
And the other one we can call it like try get exact or something.
Doesn't have
There would
that
still
have
be
the
two
same
failure
problem.
modes.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, how common is parsing culture names?
Not common at all.
So do we care at all? And because you could just
So
say,
you could have this method throw for all I care. It doesn't
Yeah.
need to be a try pattern. Like this is not going to exist in any type of hot
so you actually would suggest even going a step further and just making this get culture then? Or would you suggest to only throw for invalid names? Because it sounded like the way what the caller was asking is basically doing this in a case where you have a lot of those instances, right? But yeah,
Is this what he suggested? Because like we have the overload for Git culture, but I like the idea to have try Git culture because we don't have any ways that you try to create culture and without throwing.
Then you would want probably a return code instead of a bool to tell you why it failed. It failed either because we couldn't parse the name.
Operations.
It doesn't matter. I mean, because we don't know either. I mean, like, how you know that?
We know the name's well formed. We could check it.
You want to parse the name yourself?
I mean, we already do in certain cases.
No, we don't.
Not for this particular API, but we have logic in the framework that parses it.
No, we don't.
I mean, Kestrel does.
What?
Yeah.
Which part again?
It's ASP.NET full framework had this logic because we actually were relying on this API throwing a while back, like in previous versions of the operating system. So what we would do is we would actually like throw off stuff after the hyphen and keep trying it over and over and over again until we got a success. But we had logic to parse it.
Yeah, but this is specific for ASP.NET. This is
it's
right.
Okay, sure, fair.
Yeah. So.
Well, and if we do have a try API that returns bool, then the framework design guidelines also say we need the non-try version.
Yes. Yes, they do.
That takes the same that does throw. In which case,
let's just start with the non-try version and see whether anybody ever cares.
Yeah.
That seems like a good starting point. So then the only question is, how do we call the parameter? System defined only, exact match. I take suggestions.
Predefined only works for me. Whatever.
I prefer exact personally, but I'm probably never going to use this API myself, so I don't have a strong opinion.
Well, maybe we need intrinsics for this one.
No.
You don't think so?
No, there's no CPU support. You've got to convince Intel and AMD first.
Okay.
Or ARM.
I'll bring it up. Next time I talk to the ARM folks.
Yeah, in order to support globalization better, we need you to build a translator into all of your CPU chips with culture support.
This API would throw for invalid names as well as names that weren't.
Isn't there some weirdness around
System
Han as well,
provided.
simplified in traditional Chinese?
Yes.
Because
okay, so Windows Windows invented culture is called like ZHTWCHCN.
yes,
And they make it, the parent for it is called like ZHCHT
yes, I see that now.
which
Okay.
is, all of those are not in standard. I mean, like,
Right.
All right. Booyah.
so when you run in Linux, I mean, like, you will get ZH hands, ZH.
Yeah, that's what I just said. ZH Hans CN.
Right.
Okay. Which is parented to ZH okay.
Yeah. Yeah, CHS simplified, CHT is
Okay,
traditional.
got it. Oh man, that's all confusing. Okay.
All right. Sorted list, remove range.
Wasn't this the one that we said, oh no, this is sorted. I
Yeah.
thought this was the one where we said we could handle it via...
This should take a range.
No, the one that you're thinking of was move.
Yeah.
Move we just said expose the span.
I mean, remove range seems fine. Like, we have other APIs already approved that did remove range. Seems reasonable.
Is this a common scenario? Removing range from the source list?
It is in UI applications. I don't know about
Yeah.
list of T specifically.
Well, this is a sorted list.
Yeah.
I mean, one of those things, like, you can do it. The problem is, as the person pointed out here, it's not quite as nice to do.
Yeah.
Because basically you would have to loop over that, and then I don't exactly know how sorted list is implemented.
But so imagine you have a UI-based application, and you have a list box of like 300 items in them. You select this block of 50, and then hit delete. Like, that's remove range, basically.
So how does this work given that sorted list uses an arbitrary T as its object? It doesn't do an index and a count. It's more like a dictionary.
Yeah.
Is there an indexer?
There's index of T key.
Yeah.
But you can't do it as proposed, which is int first or int index count, because there's like it's basically a dictionary.
No, they also have get by index, and they have set by index, where you basically everything is int based.
What's the complexity?
I'm looking at the
though?
wrong thing,
Sounds
honestly.
Like it could be bad.
Or the list of T. I'm looking at the. So which one are you looking at?
I'm looking at sorted list, which is T key T value. That's what it's exposed.
Yeah, that's. I think I'm looking at the wrong API. That's why. You are right.
I don't see how this could be implemented as a remove range. The closest they have is remove at, which takes an index.
You see.
In which case, it's just doing a for loop.
Oh no! So here's the confusion. He's not actually talking about list of T value. He's looking. He's talking about the non-generic one.
No, he had both. You scroll down.
Yeah, maybe. Well, on the non-generic one, it seems finer because that one has index-based operations already. But even sorted list of TQV has a remove at.
Right, but then we're providing a helper function for something that's probably not ideal for the data structure.
I don't know how it's implemented. Is it actually?
It's actually equivalent to list of T under the covers. Like, it's actually just an array, and when you remove add an index, they just move everything else up one.
In which case, remove range is actually pretty efficient.
Yeah. Because get by index is also O1. It's just go into the array and DRF.
Right, but if we ever change this in the future.
Didn't we say we're not changing any of these?
I don't think sorted list has the same requirements as list of T.
Fair, okay.
Yeah, on the other hand, though, like things like sorted list, I mean, they're clearly helpers for particular scenarios, right? Like this one. I don't know, it seems, I don't know, I
would feel way more comfortable if we had some concept of iterators.
We do, it's called INumerable.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Not really.
We just don't have a reverse one.
Not in terms of C++ iterators. Where it's
Well, that's why ours are better. They're nicer. They're simpler.
You know, the reason that we don't have an indexer on it that takes an int index is probably because the indexes keep changing every single time something's added.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that we would never really want to expose that.
Well, and it looks like all of the base index of stuff that we had exposed on.
Yeah.
It looks like we kind of removed a lot of that from the generic version.
Yeah.
Although it looks like we have index of key and index of value.
I think part of the problem is also what happens if you say sorted list of int, or something else.
What you would actually want to do is, instead of taking index and count, you would actually want to take start with this item and end with this item. Like, remove everything between them. Because that's naturally how you access stuff inside of a sorted list. By item, not by index.
But you can typically do this by just index of key, right?
Yeah, but how do you know that it's correct, like what you're removing? And how do you know that removing something isn't going to then reorder the list?
And removing will absolutely reorder the list. It has to.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, like, logically, like when you talk about a range, like if you look at the UI scenario, it's kind of what Levi said, right? You know how many items you want to remove. Like, I think going over a key is super not natural.
Well, right, but so because this works on arbitrary objects, and those objects implement iComparable, and iComparable is used for sorting, something which has a dynamic sort algorithm, where, like, let's say if you have under 10 elements, it's sorted this way, and if you've got over 10 elements, it's sorted another way because it's more efficient. then if you do a range where you're saying remove from like 9 through 11, you remove index 9, that brings you down to 10 elements, causes the list to be resorted. And now you try and remove indexes 10 and 11, and they're no longer the things that you meant to remove. That's something we have to consider for the iComparable case.
Seems more bogus, but
I mean, we have custom sorting logic like that for string, where based on the number of elements or number of strings in a dictionary, we change our sorting differently, or our hashing algorithm. So it's not completely bogus. It's like a real world case we.
Well, it is bogus in the sense that the only party that can reasonably do that is the party that owns the data structure. Like, as soon as you pass a sorting algorithm into an arbitrary data structure, it's pretty...
Right, but
for this sorting, do we use hashing inside them?
No, this is just compare or not equality.
So removing from the list shouldn't affect it.
well, that's an implementation detail of how .NET is implementing it, not necessarily for the contract that sorted list exposes.
Yeah, so the contract that sorted list exposes is basically a sorted dictionary. You can only have one value associated with any given key, so a key can't exist twice in the same list.
Yeah, and it was also called out that remove and move need to be careful with individual operations to be compatible with observables.
Yeah.
So, like, you can't necessarily say remove or you can't have remove range and do an optimized algorithm because that might impact how observation happens.
But there is no observation on sorted list.
These are virtuals.
You could configure observation on them.
How would you do that?
With iObservable or iNotify property change, watching it, and.
But how would you watch it? You would basically have to pull the element. There is no notification you can subscribe to. There are no virtuals. Like, how would you...
Sorted list has virtuals.
Nope.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
You're looking at probably the non-generic one.
Correct.
Yeah, the non-generic one nobody cares. Like, they're all, like, array list and sorted list, they were all meant that you extend them directly. And for the generic ones, we splitted them out, right? We said, like, the core collection types are meant to be super cheap. So there's no observability. If you want that, you have to use the object model ones, the collection of T and keyed collection of T, key T value, which are basically the ones that you're supposed to wrap. Okay. So in this case, there is no observation. Like, it's literally just, it's as cheap a data structure as you can make it to be. So in that sense, I would say it's within the spirit of what you want to do there, but yeah.
So is the difference between this and sorted dictionary that you can access this one by index as well as key?
Well, the generic version doesn't allow you to access by index.
Yeah.
Okay, so his sample here is wrong then.
Well, there isn't an indexer that takes an int, but there is a get by index method.
Yeah, I never could understand the difference between.
Oh, sorry, on the non-dictionary.
Yeah, the generic version. The generic version exposes index of key and index of value, and they could be different.
Correct. There is, yes, the generic one has no get by index, which means if you want to remove a range, you actually have to take the starting and ending keys. That would be the only way to do it. And
then you'd have to have a way to enumerate through the keys, which might not be possible.
Which internally we actually have that way. Like, we actually have the ability to do that internally.
No, I mean, like, if you have an arbitrary T key where it's string, for example, not int, you can't enumerate from start key to end key.
Well, we can because we have a list of keys internally. Like, we literally have a property which is ilist of T key.
Oh, right. But then you fall into the mutating the list could change the internal sorting of the list, in which case enumerating is now invalid because enumeration rule.
Yes, so what we would do is our remove range method would look at the list. I mean, it's basically a binary search, but we look at the list, we get the index of the first element, we get the index of the last element, we nuke that part of the list, and then we move everything back up, right?
Seems expensive and non-trivial.
It is expensive, but it's cheaper than calling remove n times in a row.
How much cheaper, though?
It's O of n instead of O of n squared.
And how often does it happen that this becomes worth adding?
Yeah, I mean, like, how big are your sorted lists? I mean, in practice. Like, I mean, yeah, O(n) squared, but where n is 16.
I still think the common case for this is going to be in UI-based applications. So you're looking at like a list of files or
Yeah,
a list of images or something,
which again goes back to.
and you'll have a few hundred max, generally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to say no at this point.
Sure.
Like sorted dictionary, by the way, the difference between sorted list and sorted dictionary is just that sorted dictionary is a tree under the covers. That's the only difference. That's the same API, same API, same semantics. Which is kind of funny. Yeah. So then I guess our conclusion is not motivating enough to think through all the edge cases. There are some issues around the generic
I want to add a remove range overload that takes a range now.
Wasn't there a proposal to improve the language support for index and range, though? That's
For indexers, yeah. That's already been done.
Oh, only for indexers.
Yeah. But it would be cool if I could do like remove range 3 ... caret1 or something.
It'd be even cooler if we could just mark our existing methods to take those.
Mm-hmm.
And then the compiler would just split it out.
Just like index and count, I know what to pass in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So GitHub supports multi-line comments now.
Ooh.
So now you can finally select like 3 lines and say this comment applies to all of them.
Oh, thank you.
What's funny is the GitHub API always had the support for it because they basically give you back individual items.
I wonder if this works for suggestion replacements now. Because previously
maybe,
suggestions only worked for one line.
line.
So now can I say, take these 4 lines and replace it with this new text for those cases?
I don't know the answer to that. It was extra work, so no.
How would they render threads when you have like overlapping lines?
Same way that Word reviews do it and Codeflow reviews do it. Like they just have the comments are one underneath another.
Because you can already you can start multiple comment threads for the same line already today. So I imagine that they're just going to order them based on starting line.
Yeah, because other review tools handle this just fine. So if you wanted to improve remove range, if only we had, someone who's infiltrated the language team.
That would be Stephen Tobe, not me. He's on LDN.
Yeah, but is he still on the line?
Yeah, he's here. Might not be listening.
No.
He's purposefully staying quiet, so he doesn't have to
All right. And I think we're done for today.
We got through a decent amount. Go us.
We did go through a decent amount. Bye-bye.